Welcome, Alex. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks. I'm excited. This will be fun.
So Alex is the founder of WorkNicer, which is a co-working space business. Can you tell us a little bit more about what WorkNicer is and what you guys do?
Yeah, so we never use the term space. We always say it's WorkNicer is a co-working community.
Okay.
So, started in 2015. We've since grown into the number one co-working community in Alberta. And we're based on the fundamental belief that no one succeeds alone, right? And so WorkNicer really is about connecting people together. Because this, whether it's entrepreneurship or remote work or whatever, it can be this large, this dark, lonely place, right? And so the whole point is that you don't have to go through this thing by yourself. There's other people that have went through it, and there's other people, and it's really important just to go and celebrate the wins, work through the struggles together. So I'm sure we'll get into more of the origin story, but that's kind of what WorkNicer is all about.
I know, myself and part of my team just moved in to the one on 17th Ave, and
Cool.
So far it's been absolutely great. Everyone there's super fun to hang out with, and really, really good community.
Cool.
So how did you go from? Well, how did you originally get into working in the security industry, and then how did you transition from that to the co-working?
Yeah, well, if I go way back, so I grew up in southern Alberta, graduated high school in Lethbridge, and I was trying to figure out what to do for the summer. And so a buddy of mine, I'm on MSN Messenger, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "What are you up to this summer?" I'm like, "I don't know, just working." And I worked at Princess Auto at the time.
Okay.
And then I'm like, "What are you doing?" So he said, "I'm going to Virginia to install alarm systems." I'm like, "What?" And told me a little bit more about that. Apparently this is this big summer sales type industry where people go down to the States, and now in Canada too, but at the time go down to the States and sell or install these security systems. And so I'm like, that sounds great. He's like, yeah, you can make 10 or 20 grand in the summer just installing systems. And I'm like, that sounds fun. So I kind of signed up to be this technician for the summer sales team to install alarms. And then I learned about the sales side, and it's all door-to-door sales. And so I learned about that. I'm like, I've never sold anything ever. And I'm like, oh, you can make more money doing that? Let's try that thing out, right? So I moved across the continent and went to Virginia, and just got dropped off in a neighborhood. Never moved away or lived away from home before. Didn't have a car, didn't have a cell phone. And I just dropped you off and said, okay, go sell some systems. And I was kind of okay at it. And, fast forward 10 or so years, I had eventually, the very next year, actually, I should say, I was asked by another security company to come and join them and manage the sales team back in Virginia. And then I wound up managing sales teams across the U.S. and across Canada for a few different companies. And then I eventually got hired onto the executive team for a company out of Toronto. And we built them into the largest ADT dealership in the country. And then moved back to Calgary. I was kind of half in Calgary and half out of it. Kind of 6 months in, 6 months out. And we started the security company here and built that into a kind of semi-nationwide thing. Had offices in a few different places. That's kind of how I got into it.
Awesome. And then how did you transition from that into WorkNicer?
When you do something for so long, you get really good at it typically, which I ended up getting decent at what we did. But I think a lot of people start to disguise experience in something with passion for doing it, right? And so really, it's like I loved the security industry. I loved the technology in it. I had watched it change people's lives. They felt safer. They slept better. Their homes were saved. Their dogs were saved. Family, you know what I mean? It was like a lot of really cool success stories around what the security industry does for people. And I think just because you believe in it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a passion thing, right? And I think a lot of people fall into that trap, though, right? It's like, I've done this forever. I should keep doing it because I'm good at it. It's a sunk cost mentality. And so, I was kind of coming close to a birthday, and I'm just like, is this, not that I usually care about that stuff, it was just like a reflection point for me. It was one of those times that kind of made me think about it. And I said, is this, like, what's the next step for this? Do I want to keep doing this forever? Do I need to scale it up? What's going to happen? And I realized that I just needed something different. So I went out and I applied for some jobs, even got some offers, realized I was like totally one of the least employable people that I know. Yeah. And eventually I kind of started a charity group with this other guy called 100 Men Who Give a Damn. And the idea behind this charity group is that it's 100 guys that get together 4 times a year, and we raise $10,000 for local charity, $100 at a time. So everybody donates $100 to a local charity that's near and dear to one of the members. And then that charity comes back the next time and explains where that $10,000 went. And so that's cool. But what I loved absolutely most, like what really, really stuck out to me, was when you have all these people coming together in a way that they would never, ever connect otherwise. Right? It's not an industry event. It's not a networking event. It's not, you're not flipping business cards. It's like they're coming there to like give away some money or give away their time. And you have all these different people that, whether it's downtown oil and gas professionals, older guys, younger guys, tradespeople, whatever it is. You have all these different people that, would never connect otherwise. And that was something that was really special to me. And so I said, how can I do this all the time and not just, 4 days a year? And so that's kind of where Work Nicer came from. It was this idea of, bringing people together in a way that they would never otherwise connect. This fulfills a really basic physiological need for people, right? The sense of belonging. This is on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Sometimes that will exceed the need for food and shelter even. And so we're just simply using workplace as the conduit to bring people together.
Very cool. So for the few people who maybe aren't familiar with co-working, how would you explain it? How it works?
I mean, at a very basic level, to me, the way I explain it works is actually not on the basic side, right? Okay. It's so much more than a desk, right? You can share desks with people in a bunch of different places. You have a desk at home, but at the end of the day, co-working is this thing where I believe that you're doing life together in some form or fashion, some more than others. But this is a place where, again, you don't have to go through this alone, whatever this thing is that you're doing. And so often, work is just this like thing that you do for 8 hours a day or so you think, and then you just talk about sports, or you talk about, the news or politics or whatever you want to talk about, and work's just like this thing that you have to do. Whereas this way, it's like people end up connecting together, and yes, they're working, but it's also building these human-to-human connections that goes so much further beyond work. And so, yes, we provide all the workplace basics, desks and Wi-Fi and printing and all that kind of stuff, boardrooms and meeting rooms and 24-hour access and all these cool perks. Even some actually like really fun ones, like there's beer on tap and unlimited coffee, and there's, I don't know what else we got. You're there, just like all these cool things. But to me, it's like that's all just like this fringe stuff, right? That's something which is somewhat easily replicated. Mm-hmm. But really what we're so focused on is this basic need for human connection.
Yeah, amazing. So how do you go about fostering that community and getting people like to talk to each other and to like make it more than just people sitting apart quietly working by themselves? How do you make it a network, like a group thing, a community thing?
Yeah. I think you're talking about culture, right? And it's interesting because, we focus a lot of energy on culture, and we talk about it all the time, and people always say, oh, Work Nicer has this awesome culture. I'm like, yeah, I agree. It's great. And so, I was asked this one time to give a little talk on culture. I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. It seems like, people like what we have going on, and it feels good, and everyone agrees that we have something that's good here. And so I went and tried to prepare for this talk, and I actually didn't know what the hell I was going to talk about, right? Because what am I going to talk? Am I talking about what is culture? How do you build culture? How do you identify bad culture? How do you change it? Like, what, like, there's so many things. And at the end of the day, it's like I was trying to figure out how to, how do these companies do this, and how did we accomplish what we've accomplished from a cultural or from a true community perspective. And at the end of the day, it's like I just kept saying, well, it's like it's about doing the right thing. There's a fly here.
Yeah.
It's about doing the right thing. Like, okay, well, if you actually drill that down a little bit further, it's just like, well, don't be a shitty person, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that, like, shitty people don't know that they're shitty, right? And so really, if you actually break this down, like, it just gets down to foundational DNA stuff, right? Culture is not this thing that you can just bolt on to a business or to an organization. A lot of people think that you can start a company, focus on product, focus on profitability, focus on, accounting dollars and cents, or marketing, or scaling. And then it's like, yeah, we'll figure out the people stuff, or we'll figure out the culture stuff later, right? When we can afford it. Because people think that culture is simply, they have hammocks and ping pong tables or whatever it is. And so at the end of the day, culture is more than just wearing the jeans to work, or jeans to work on Fridays, right? And where this actually came back to at the very, very beginning is what I mentioned with the reason why I wanted to start Work Nicer was bring together I started with these 10 people that I knew that we were all in a business group together, and we were kind of doing this. We were doing life together. We spent a lot of time together, totally different industries and totally different backgrounds. I said, well, let's just do this in closer proximity with greater intention, right? And from that very beginning, it was also about ensuring that we nipped negative cultural things in the butt and made difficult choices that led to positive cultural decisions.
So what types of negative things?
Good question. And so myself and my team is actually really quite intuitive when it comes to people and fit. And so, let's say somebody comes in and we're away at the beginning. We've got this office that's empty. There's not very many offices ever empty now. There's just such a high demand. But at the very beginning, someone's like, yeah, I'll come in and I'll pay that, $30,000 a year for this big office. And we knew right away that they're not coming in for the right reasons. It doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. And we said no. And so even though we're still trying to figure out how to pay bills at that time on a monthly basis, to say no to people like that is really important, because it does a few things, right? One, it sends a message to your team that we can say no to people, right? The other thing is it sends a message to your customers, in our case our members, that we've got their backs and we're looking out for them. And the third thing it does is the right people start to attract the right people. Mm-hmm. And so now we very rarely end up having to say no to people or run into problems where even like the wrong people will come in. Not that they're the wrong people, it's just that Work Nicer might not be the right fit. Mm-hmm. And I think the key to it is that we acknowledged very early on that we're not going to be all things to everyone. I think we're most things to most people.
Yeah.
Right? But I think it's so easy for people to get drawn into this. Well, we need to have this for this thing and this for this person and so on and so forth. But I think it's just like, stay true to who we are. So we're not an events company. We're not a programming company, as an example. And that's something that a lot of other people in this industry get sucked into, is that early on they get started and maybe they're not as full as they would like. And so then they have to supplement that, or they believe, rather, they have to supplement that income with people who come to them and ask them to rent their space out for events. And then all of a sudden it's really easy to get that spiral out of control. And we've said from the very beginning, it's like, no, this physical space exists to serve our members and to serve the community outside of our walls. And so rather than when we gave space away to our friends in the community for events and whatever else, then we never looked at that as a lost revenue opportunity or as a time suck, right? We looked at this as a responsibility that we have. And the best part is that not only was the team bought into that, but members were as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that totally makes sense. That's really interesting. So you got it off the ground, you said with 10 people. I think you mentioned that you got them to pay like their first 2 months of membership or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when they paid their first month and they paid a 1 month account credit.
Okay.
Right? And so it's kind of like a deposit, but not really. And so, yeah, they paid their first 2 months, and they sent it via e-transfer. And I'm like, shit, I don't have a bank account. So I had to quickly go out and set up a bank account. And and then we took that and put that as a deposit on the lease. And I'm like, great, now we've just got to stay 1 month ahead of everything else. And so really what the focus was, and this is again a DNA going back to this culture and community thing, is that we were solely focused on retention. Right? We were there to serve our members first and foremost, full stop. It wasn't about going out there and trying to market and do a bunch of online advertising and sales, trying to get people in and whatever else. It was just like, if we can keep everyone we have, then eventually they will attract more people, right? And it's just about being extremely patient with that process and saying, you know what, we don't need to grow crazy fast, even though we ended up growing kind of fast. Mm-hmm. But I think being okay with not growing very quickly and doing the, what I say, I just say it's like, attraction by retention model.
Right.
And so then all of us and all of your decisions are based on your clients, your members. And it's not based on what we think the new people might want or this new person that comes in. And that allows us to say no to those weird requests too. Right? Because we have to say to them, hey, like our loyalty and our allegiance is to our members.
Yeah.
Sorry. Right? And so that's kind of just how it started. And then, and it's actually been that way really from the beginning. It doesn't mean that we don't have, an online presence really, but we don't really invest money in any kind of real traditional advertising or a lot of social media ads. We'll boost some posts here and there. We're kind of testing some stuff now, but it's like 3.5 years in. It's just really always been about, hey, focus on the members that we have.
What was your first big struggle with the business?
I mean, it's easy to say taking that first leap, because that's the same with any business, though, right? It's just like, signing a lease and putting down some money and saying, okay, we're going to go do this.
Was there anything after you opened that seemed like it might be insurmountable?
Yeah, I think if you fast forward to really, really big stuff, because, there's a lot of tough decisions along the way. I think the hardest one was that example I gave, or the hardest first one, or whatever, the first hard one, I don't know, was, saying no to these large potential clients that would want to come in and pay a bunch of money that would make it a lot easier to pay the bills and to hire staff and that kind of thing. But, so I think that's one. Yeah. I think from there, so Work Nicer originally opened in a totally different spot than any of the current outposts. So I don't know if you knew that or not.
I didn't.
Yeah, so we opened in this one spot. It's kind of half the size of Stephen Avenue, the Stephen Avenue outpost. Felt smaller, much more traditional office. And that was the first 10. We kind of grew that into about 30 or so in the first 6 months. Quickly realized that it wasn't going to be this like long-lasting spot. This isn't going to be what we need. But we had a big long lease. Well, not big long. It was 3 years at the time. But yeah, I had a 3-year lease there. And so I'm like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And so then we found this other spot, which is the current Stephen Avenue spot. And it happened to be owned by the same landlord. And so we had to convince them to rip up our old lease, convince this 6-month-old company with no money and no experience to let us sign a lease that was twice as long for twice as much like square footage, and then to go in and do it and say, and the nice thing was we took it on a sublease for the first little while, so we were renting from another company that had downsized. Yeah. And then after that sublease period ended, there was this big, huge deposit that was going to be due on this new lease. And so I think that was something at the time that felt extremely insurmountable, was to say, hey, we're coming up to and we can cash flow, we're paying our bills, but we're constantly growing and hiring team. But how are we going to get the cash for this lease deposit that's going to come up? So I think that was a really big one.
How did you get the cash?
I went to them and I convinced them to reduce our deposit somehow, and then delay it another 6 months.
Oh, nice.
And so it's just a matter, I think, of communicating with people, but also giving them good reason.
Yeah.
Right? I went to them. I said, "Hey, we're a small business, and we're just getting going, and things are going well so far. You can't spend this money legally, right? Because it's deposit money, so they have to hold that in trust.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, just let us use this money to grow, and then we'll be able to give you this deposit. I mean, the more money you leave in our pockets, the more successful that we're going to be, which is better long term for you as a landlord, right? And so I think if you just say that and mean it, which I totally did, they can get behind that. Now, granted, the office vacancy and the economy being what it is, I think that definitely plays into them being more receptive to that message. But you've also got to be able to think outside of the box.
Yeah.
So from there, I think really the next big one was, to be honest, I feel like I've constantly felt insurmountable problems. It's just literally from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. But the big one was opening in Edmonton. That was a whole new city. It was the biggest spot. It's like 12,000 square feet. It was a 10-year lease.
Wow.
It is like a multi-million-dollar liability.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of construction costs in order to build it out. I'm like, okay, that's becoming the real deal.
Yeah.
Right? And so, we had to convince this like institutional landlord from Vancouver to let this little Calgary company open something in Edmonton on this main floor, big space. And that required a whole bunch of money. That was even like $100,000 plus just deposit in order to let them, like, convince them that we could do the deal.
Wow.
So I said, okay, yeah, we'll do it. We didn't have it. So I had to go find it. And so that was a time where part of it was we brought on some investment cash at that time, not a lot of money. But yeah, we've had very little to no debt until recently. And I think it's just because we've always focused on getting sales first, focusing on members first, and being able to cash flow from day one.
What made you decide to take that leap recently? Was it you just wanted to be able to grow quicker?
I think the one thing that truly stood out to me, so you had Graham Sherman on this. So he's become one of my very best friends.
Oh, awesome.
And I was explaining to him, because he's been through a lot of shit with Toolshed too.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so I always go to him and I say, I know you've been through X, Y, and Z. What should I do? Or just get his feedback. And the one thing he said to me, he's just like, if you're not scared shitless, you're doing it wrong. And I think that's part of it. I think that I am most comfortable when I am trying to climb my way out of something. And so I've kind of thrown myself into these things that aren't necessarily risks per se. A lot of people think it would be a big risk, but I think it's somewhat calculated. Like it's not like it's thought out, or I don't think I won't be able to accomplish it.
Yeah.
But it is these really seemingly big things. And I've always been the kind of person that has pulled it out. Even if it is at the last minute, procrastination or whatever. Like, I'm a huge procrastinator, but I'll always do what I need to do to go get it done. And so I'm just kind of leaning on that a little bit. But I also think that is the stories of the leaders that have come before us. Right? Is like, that's what they have all done. Like, that is every story that we look up to from every person. It's always been about going out there and doing something that makes you uncomfortable, that doesn't feel like it's going to be easy, and then you just figure out how to freaking do it.
Yeah. So I want to ask a little bit. I'm going to try and ask 3 different questions here that I think all tie together based on your answer to someone's question at the founder event. How do you deal with stress and avoiding burnout in relation to how much you work? Or maybe, I don't know if how much you've worked changed, but I know, like, starting Work Nicer, you didn't take much time to
No.
breathe.
No. and I think now I take less.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's getting crazier and crazier. But I think at the end of the day, this notion of work-life balance is total bullshit, right? I think it's when people think balance, they immediately go to a beach in their mind, right? And that's not balanced. That's not sustainable. You can't do that forever. And for one, this is just me, and I also really like to work. So if we're talking about real vacation, it's like I will feel more stress and more anxiety if I truly unplug on vacation. If I can't look at email or keep tabs on what's going on, I will feel less comfortable than if I can go and just check something for half an hour or an hour a day and then disconnect. And that's what works for me. So I think at the end of the day, honestly, you need to do what works for you, but you also need to be honest with yourself, because I think a lot of people are going to hide behind this concept of work-life balance as a reason to not do what they need to do to get shit done.
Yeah.
Especially if you've committed to something or someone. It's like if you've made a commitment, then go do it. You don't get to go hide behind, oh, I need work-life balance in order, so sorry, I couldn't do what I committed to do. So I think that is part of it. In terms of how do I deal with stress and burnout, honestly, it is this up and down thing, right? You'll never get just consistent schedule, and I think I'm stressed a lot, especially recently, but that's just like I just know it's a phase, and just own that when you're in it. Do you know what I'm saying? I think it's like just own it when you're in it and know that it's not forever. And anybody can do anything if it's not forever. And this goes back to my summer sales door-to-door days, right? We would sell 6 days a week, starting at noon, going till 10 p.m., training at 10 a.m. the next morning or whatever it is. And it's just like I know I could do this because it was only 108 days in the summer. And so that's the other thing too, is start looking at things for what they are. People are worried because I have it, maybe I'm spending, and I worry about this too, but it's like I spend maybe too many nights away from my wife at home in a week. But when really, who cares about a week? It comes and goes like that, right? It's like, you should be able to do this stuff. And again, that's what works for me, not necessarily for everyone, but it's like, weeks or months where things are going to change, because you've got a long time on this earth. Yeah. Right? It's like we're a third of the way through, maybe. And so it's just like there's so much time left. Then it's like, who cares? Do what you need to for the next few months or year in order to have that pay off in 5 or 10 years. And that's not necessarily just money either. Right? That's the stuff which is, and don't get me wrong, I say yes to breaks and to fun all the time. I took 2 vacations in the last month. Yeah. Which is crazy. I mean, I worked while I was on them. So you need to be able to, but the only reason that I feel somewhat comfortable doing that, and the team feels comfortable with me doing that, and one of those without my wife, so the reason my wife was okay with me doing that, was because it's like, when I'm here, it's just like I'm going all in. Yeah. The other thing that helps too, sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit. Okay. The other thing I think that really helps me is actually having a place to go to work. So obviously work nicer. Yeah. And then that way when I'm home, I'm generally home, right? There's a difference between physically at home and present at home. Yeah. So I don't typically go home. Actually, I never sit down when I get home and open my laptop and get back to email or whatever you have to do. It's like, I'll stay out as long as I need to, or if there's events or people I got to connect with or meetings. But once I'm at home, I'm home. We've got some time together. We can do what we have to do. And then maybe Danielle will go to bed and I'll stay up for a few hours and do some more work, or maybe I won't. And lately I haven't been doing that a lot because I feel like I really am quite burnt out. And I'm just like, I don't have it in me to do that right now. Yeah. But then also that is okay, because I'm being honest with myself rather than trying to stay up and trying to do more shit and be less effective the next day. and just get in this terrible cycle. Just own the fact that it's like, hey, I'm not going to get to all of this right now.
Yeah. I'd like to go back and touch on what you said about people using work-life balance as an excuse, because I think I can really agree with that, because I have friends who've tried to, or known people who've tried to start businesses, and they're like, oh no, I'm just going to work 9 to 5. I'm not going to work weekends. I'm going to just hang out and do other stuff, go on trips, not put the money back into the business.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then a lot of the times I've seen several people try and do that, and then it just doesn't work out because they're not willing to put in the work. I think it depends on the person. Obviously, some people are more inclined or maybe just more productive in starting businesses that are a little bit easier to float.
Yeah.
But I think people do use that as an excuse to avoid working really hard.
Totally. I think they do all the time, myself included sometimes. But I think it's also just own the fact that you're not your most productive, or you're done for the day, either because you have to be or you want to be. Don't cover it up with these other excuses, right? It just drives, anyway.
I've been thinking about something else recently. I haven't said this to anybody yet because I think it's kind of controversial.
Perfect.
So I'm curious about your opinion on it, because
Sure.
I know a lot of people would really disagree with me. There seems to be this really big movement towards kind of putting failure on a pedestal and being like, failing's fine, failing's okay. But on the flip side, talking to someone like Graham, for example, in the first interview, he's like, the reason we succeeded is because there was no option to fail.
Right.
Just couldn't let it happen. So where do you see things between those two balances? Because for me, I'm starting to think that there's this lean towards praising failure and failure being okay, when I'm wondering if that's almost an excuse to just not be successful.
Totally. Yeah, that is an interesting question. And totally some people would, create, there'd be quite the controversial conversation around that with certain people. I think I'd be curious to see what Graham has to say about this, but I'm guessing that it's like, you're right. They'll say that Toolshed is successful because there was no option to fail, but that doesn't mean that they haven't made mistakes.
No, definitely not.
Right? And that doesn't mean that they haven't fucked up.
Yeah.
And I think that, so the way that I think I would say it, because you're right, it's like if Graham went out there and said, hey, there's an option to fail, then maybe they would have let it fail, and it would have failed along with everybody's, he'll say his he's all in with everybody's all in that he knows, right? All these people that put money into that business would also lose out. And so I think, especially out of Silicon Valley, where there's so much money that's being invested in stuff, and then people praise this failure, so I think that is totally not right and totally not fair. I do think, however, that on a smaller scale, failure and mistakes should be, I don't know if I think they should be somewhat celebrated, because I think that's part of the, you're not going to bat 1,000.
I think the learning from those should be celebrated.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. Either going through it, or not even just necessarily the learning. I think especially on our team as an example, I say, hey, you guys are empowered to make basically whatever decision you want, and I will back you if you have a good reason for making the decision, even if it ends up proving to be the wrong one. Right? They'll never get in shit for it, but I think it's and I think so, taking the step and making the choice versus sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it, or not making the decision, should also be celebrated.
Yeah, definitely. Right? Taking the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I do believe that, I think it's another, it can be this other form of laziness, right? Like, oh, this is too hard. I don't know how I'm going to overcome this. Nah, let's just pack it in. Right? And I think that is garbage. But I do know, I at the same time, I think it's important to know when to call it quits.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of people that, this thing's here again. I think there's a lot of people that are still doing what they're doing because it's what they've done. Whether they like it or think they like it or don't think they like it, or what, I think it's fine to say that, hey, this business idea did not, you're not, I think the bigger thing here is that you're not defined by what you do.
No.
You're not defined by your business, right? It's just like today, it's like, yeah, a lot of people in my immediate network know me because of Work Nicer, but I hope that Work Nicer doesn't define me now or forever. And Work Nicer probably isn't going to be the last thing that I do. And so I think it's like these kinds of conversations and bringing people together and all those things that Work Nicer and the people around me stand for is what's more important.
Right.
And I think it's so easy for people to get caught up in being defined by the thing that they're doing that they also don't necessarily, sometimes they'll go down that path where it's like there's no option for failure here, because they hold their whole identity within that.
Yeah, kind of like what you said, there are definitely some businesses that should be executed earlier than later.
Yeah.
and moved on from.
Totally.
And ideas for sure. So to a degree, I think stupid fly.
See?
Yeah. I agree with that. So last question, where do you see yourself both personally and your business in 10 years?
Good question. So I have a tough time with planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Bob, who's on our team, he's the navigator at Work Nicer. And he helps make sure that we're kind of on the right track and pulls us in the extreme cultural direction. So, to make sure that we're always still making the right decisions for the right reasons. And so he's tried to get me to make these plans. And to me, I have a tough time with commitment. And the reason I've recently somewhat discovered is that it's because I view planning and commitment in my head as rigid and non-optional, right? So it's like, typically speaking, like once I commit to something, I'm like in, right? And so we've kind of tried to start deploying this concept of just enough planning. So it's like, okay, we kind of know where we're going, sort of, but it allows me the flexibility to go off and seize certain opportunities or think outside of the box when I need to. And so if Bob was here, he would give this concept of 20-20-20, right? So he would say, 20 Work Nicer outposts by the end of 2020 with 20 million in revenue, which I think is a little extreme. At the same time, there's 4 spots right now, building out another floor at one of those buildings, and we're actually working on a whole other concept. Like, it's still Work Nicer, but it's a Work Nicer plus an additional concept at another physical spot, which I think, if it goes through, we'll do by the end of the year. And I've never told anybody really that before.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so it could be, and there's a couple other opportunities on the back burner where, we could theoretically double the company this year again. It may not happen either. And I think that's what's important from a planning perspective is that it's like we don't have to do any of those things. And I think it's so easy sometimes to get caught up in a plan or in a business plan specifically where it's like we've got to go do this, whether it's the right decision or not. What I do know for sure is that we're not getting caught up with how much revenue, how many outposts, how many members, profit margins, because those things I think are somewhat dependent on external circumstances a little bit, right? They depend on capital and if we can raise any or if we have it, or the economy or vacancy wherever or whatever. And I think we really choose to focus on what will not change. And that is this human to human need for connection, right? This basic physiological need. And so regardless of what happens into the, from the co-working market landscape, whether that's, competitors or institutional landlords or whatever it is, whether, again, vacancy and office rates and fluctuations in markets or politics, none of that stuff is really going to change. But that's why it's like those are the things that we kind of use as a catalyst for the root of what won't change, and that's just focusing on our members. And so I think it is going to be very easy for us to well, that's not true, not very easy, but one thing I can certainly commit to, whether it's now or in 10 years, even if all the other stuff we're not exactly sure, we know that we'll continue to be sticking to our guiding principles and ensuring that we put members first and do what's right for them and listen to their feedback as much as possible. Doesn't mean, again, we're not going to bat 1,000 and get it right. But I think as long as we're open and transparent with people, whether that's the outside community or members, that they'll forgive us and show us grace, and we're going to do some amazing things together.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see where it goes and see the new opportunities for places I can work with you guys.
Me too, man. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it'll be cool to hang out.
Cool. Likewise.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you almost every day.
Pleasure. Me too, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks.
Our first sponsor is Syndication, which is a video production company that I started. We do video production and online marketing for businesses of all sizes, ranging from solopreneurs to Fortune 500 companies. Our second sponsor is Gravity Cafe. They've been gracious enough to give us their space. The coffee's awesome. They have live music 3 nights a week. The beer's great. It's an awesome place to come hang out. Our next sponsor is Flagship Business Brokers. Flagship Business Brokers provides entrepreneurs with support through the purchase, sale, or financing of a business. They have a proven track record of delivering fast, cost-efficient, and client-focused transactions. Another sponsor of the Ambition Project is BusinessLink. BusinessLink is Alberta's entrepreneurial hub. They are a nonprofit organization that helps people navigate the steps towards starting their own businesses. Just because you're in business for yourself doesn't mean you're in business by yourself. BusinessLink's team of in-house startup experts are there to support you all along the way. Our next sponsor is the Better Business Bureau. Your BBB helps businesses build visibility, credibility, savings, leads, and community through BBB accreditation while funding free marketplace services with more than 1 million instances of service to consumers every year. Visit bbb.org/Calgary to learn more today.